The stars were quiet, and the sky above Virulon was calm and blue like always, but deep below that sky trouble had already begun, and no one on the peaceful planet had time to understand why it started. The people of Virulon were small and soft, and full of dreams and stories, and they believed in peace and light and song, and they had never known war or fire or anything close to death on such a large scale. Their cities were built from glass and silver, and their power came from sun and wind, and nothing on their world had sharp edges or hard walls, because they had never needed them before now. But now the sky was turning red and black, and something had arrived that did not belong, and it came without a face or a voice or a reason, and it began to tear everything apart. It began with the eastern cities, first where the towers were tall and beautiful, and children played in open gardens, and no one expected the sound that came from above like metal screaming or a monster without a name. Machines dropped from the sky in black fire, and they moved fast and without warning, and they were not ships or drones or anything the Virelians had ever seen before, and they did not speak or stop or care. They destroyed without pause, and they moved from building to building, cutting through walls and streets, and anything alive, and when the Virelians tried to speak or send peace signals, the machines did not answer. They did not slow down, and they did not feel, and they did not stop, and soon the leaders of Virulon had no choice but to send one last message into the stars, a signal of fear and hope, and one final cry for help. They called it an SOS because it was the oldest kind of signal, and they sent it in every direction through every wave and every channel and every kind of pulse, hoping that someone out there in the black would hear. They knew the galaxy had many races and many powers, and even though Virulon was small and quiet, they believed someone would care, someone would hear their voice and send help. They waited as cities fell and towers burned and streets filled with smoke and dust, and the machines kept coming, always silent, always fast, always deadly, and the Virelians kept sending the signal again and again. Weeks passed, and the signal floated through space like a ghost, and no one answered, not a single voice, not a single light in the dark, just the machines on Virulon growing stronger and spreading faster. The leaders of Virulon gathered in their last safe place, a deep shelter under the mountains where the machines had not yet reached, and they looked at the screen that showed the signal still going and still unanswered. One of the leaders, named Eller, placed his hand on the glass and whispered to no one in particular, "What if no one comes? What if we are truly alone out there?" Another leader, a woman named Siri, said, "Maybe someone hears us, but they are afraid. Maybe they know what these machines are, and they do not want to get involved." They all sat in silence and watched the last satellite fall from the sky above them, and the machines moved closer every day, and hope was running low like the air in the deepest caves. Far away across the stars, the signal passed through forgotten systems and old relay stations and broken satellites and ancient tech that barely worked, and still it traveled because someone had to hear. And then it reached a place that most of the galaxy never talked about, a place on the edge of the known maps, a system marked only with a red warning line and a name that many feared. Earth. The signal passed through the outer systems and bounced off a listening post hidden on the dark side of Earth's moon, and the small black machine that sat there blinked once, then twice, and began to record. It sent the signal to a command center deep under the ice of Antarctica, where humans watched the stars with quiet eyes and steady hands, always waiting, always listening. The message was full of static and pain and broken language, but the core was clear: help us, we are dying, our world is falling, help, please someone help. The humans listened, and they played it again and again, and they watched the images that came with it: fire and metal and screaming cities and eyes full of fear and voices full of silence. They watched until the room fell quiet, and the air felt cold, and the commander, a man named Cole, stood up from his chair and said only one thing: "We cannot ignore this." Someone whispered, "But no one ever calls us. They never ask Earth for help." Another voice said, "Maybe they didn't mean to. Maybe they just sent it to everyone, and it got to us by accident." Cole nodded and said, "Maybe, but they asked, and we heard that means something, and if we turn away, then we are no better than the ones who sent those machines." He walked to the center of the room and tapped the old command key, the one made for a single use, the one never touched in years, and the red light on the ceiling began to glow. "Prepare the fleet," he said. "We have work to do." Across Earth and the Moon and Mars, the call went out to every captain and every squad and every pilot who wore the black symbol of the Terran Defense Force. Ships began to wake from long sleep, and weapons were unlocked, and old machines were tested, and people began to move with purpose and silence and fire in their hearts. For too long, Earth had stayed quiet and still and ignored and alone, while the rest of the galaxy called it dangerous and wild and full of death. They were right. Earth was a death world, the only one known to train soldiers in acid storms and gravity fields and frozen wastes and burning skies. The only one where survival meant pain and strength and memory and heart. And now that death world had heard a call, and it was going to answer. In the cold, dark space around Virulon, the machines circled like sharks, and the last city stood alone, its lights fading, and its people waiting with tired breath and shaking hands. Eller stood at the edge of the last tower and looked at the sky and wondered if the stars had already forgotten them, and if maybe this was how it all ended. But then the stars blinked. Not one, not two, but many. And the machines paused. Above the clouds, a shadow spread like a wave, and the clouds split with fire and speed, and the wind screamed louder than it ever had. A shape appeared. No, not one shape, many hundreds, maybe thousands, all black and cold and silent as death itself. But this time the fire was not for destruction. This time it was for rescue. The Black Fleet had arrived, and behind them came the voice of Earth, carried in a signal of its own, simple and strong and full of promise. "We heard you, and we are not afraid." The message kept playing in the deep chamber under the ice, and the screen kept flashing the same broken images over and over, and the voice of the alien people kept crying out for help from across the stars, and the sound of their fear filled the room like a cold wind. Commander Cole stood still as the signal echoed, and his officers watched in silence, and not one person dared to speak until he turned around and looked at the faces in the room, and his voice was strong but quiet like steel under snow. "This is not a question," he said. "This is a duty, and we will not turn our back." One of the young techs raised his hand and asked carefully, "Sir, do you believe they're worth the risk?" Cole looked at him and replied, "If we start weighing the worth of lives, then we have already lost our own." The command was given and the order sent through secure channels, and it moved fast across the Earth network and jumped to bases on the Moon and outposts on Mars, and even reached the hidden dark stations that floated near Saturn and beyond. Across every military deck, across every orbital ring, across every silent moon base, lights turned red and alarms came alive, and the soldiers of Earth, the Deathworlders, began to rise from their rest and step into their armor. Every soldier knew the stories of what Earth was to the galaxy, a planet full of storms and teeth, and survival, a world where nature tried to kill you every single day, and where only the strongest could live to see another sunrise. The aliens called Earth a death world because they were afraid, but they had never seen what that word truly meant when the people of Earth brought their strength into space. The Black Vow Fleet was not made for peace talks or science missions or diplomacy smiles. It was built for only one reason: to break anything that threatened innocent lives and end any force that dared to cross the line. This fleet had not moved in years, not since the last border war with the pirate clans in the Red Line. But now the ships began to wake and hum with power as crews ran to stations and engines roared to life. Inside the flagship, named Vindicator, the captain, a woman named Reelan, stepped onto the bridge with cold fire in her eyes and spoke only 3 words to her crew. "Load everything now." Weapons were armed, supplies were loaded, and cryo chambers opened for the troops who had trained for battles that most minds could not imagine, and who were born in fire and raised in chaos. These were not people who needed comfort or safety. They were the product of a world that gave neither, and in return, they became strong fast and relentless like the storms that raised them. Among the soldiers was a man named Jace, a ground commander known for his silence in battle and his rage in training, and he stood beside his unit as they checked their gear and watched the Virulon footage on their visors. He watched as the alien cities fell, as the machines tore through homes and gardens, as the children cried out with voices that echoed even across the stars, and his fists clenched, but his voice remained calm. He looked at his team and said, "We move fast, we hit hard, we save what we can, and we bury what stands in our way." No one questioned the plan. The fleet had over 100 warships, each one armed with weapons that had never been used in open space before, and each one cloaked in armor forged from materials that could survive black hole pressure and solar flame. The Vindicator led the charge, and behind it followed the Hammerfall, the Widow's Grace, the Ironclad, and the rest of the fleet like silent shadows drawn by the cry of the helpless. They jumped together, using the old gates, the ones that cracked time and space, and the stars around them blurred and twisted as the fleet vanished from Earth's orbit and reappeared on the edge of Virulon's system in less than an hour. The first thing they saw was fire. The planet below was burning, and giant scars covered the surface where cities had once stood, and black shapes moved through the smoke like insects crawling through the bones of the dead. The machine ships floated above the surface, cold and dead-looking, but deadly and fast, and when the human fleet arrived, those ships turned slowly, as if surprised and not ready for what had come. But Earth was ready. Captain Rillen sent a single message across all frequencies, not a question, not a warning, only a choice. Leave or be destroyed. There was no reply. She gave no second chance. The first volley was silent, and then the sky lit up with white fire as the Deathworlders fired their main cannons and sent shockwave through the machine line and tore through metal and circuits like a knife through paper. The enemy ships moved to fight back, but they were not fast enough and not smart enough to match human tactics, and soon the orbit above Virulon became a graveyard of burning steel and shattered wings. While the space battle raged above, the real mission was only beginning. Dropships launched from the human fleet and flew straight into the burning skies of Virulon, carrying soldiers in black armor and eyes full of focus and hearts made of iron. Commander Jay stood in the lead ship with his rifle ready and his team beside him, and he could see the ground below through the glass, the ruined cities, the fleeing people, the shadows of the machines. He tapped his comm and said to all teams, "Ground fall in 60 seconds, weapons hot, no second guesses. You see metal, you take it down." The ships hit the ground like thunder, and the soldiers poured out into fire and smoke, and battle began before the dust even cleared. The machines turned to face the new threat, and they charged forward, but what they met was not fear or confusion or slow response. They met Earth. They met the children of a world that taught you to kill or be killed, to adapt or die, to rise or fall with blood in your mouth and heat in your chest. Jace and his team moved like ghosts, cutting through machine lines and pulling survivors from collapsed buildings, and every time a machine fell, another one rose, but the humans did not stop. The Virelians, who watched from hiding, did not understand what they were seeing: humans fighting like they had no fear, humans taking fire and giving it back 10 times over, humans roaring into the darkness like they were born for this moment. And maybe they were. Maybe this was what Earth had always been meant to do: not rule, not conquer, not destroy, but protect those who could not fight, protect those who still had light in their hearts and stories in their eyes. As the battle raged across the streets and skies, the machines began to fall back, not because they were afraid, but because they had never seen anything like this before, and they did not know how to win against something that did not break. Above in the Vindicator, Rillen watched the numbers and maps and saw her people moving through fire like wind through trees, and she allowed herself one small nod. "We are here," she whispered to the stars, "and we are not leaving." The stars ahead were silent and cold, but the ships that now moved through them were not born from silence. They were born from storms and iron and fire, and deep below their black surfaces burned a purpose that no machine could understand. The Black Fleet was awake. Each ship had a name whispered in old human stories and feared in the secret corners of space, names like Vindicator and Widow's Grace, and Hell's Echo, names that did not promise mercy, names that promised an end. The fleet did not speak as it traveled, it did not sing, it did not shine, it moved like a shadow across the stars, silent and sharp and full of weight like the night before a great storm. Inside each ship, soldiers moved like machines, but they were not machines, they were something worse. They were people shaped by pain and duty and the hunger to protect, even if it meant turning themselves into weapons. Jay sat with his squad in the belly of the Widow's Grace and checked his gear for the 5th time, though he knew it was already perfect. because checking gave his hands something to do, while his thoughts kept circling the images they had seen. He remembered the burning towers, the broken faces, the strange, soft creatures who called for help with nothing left but hope and a weak signal, and that memory lit something in his chest, something cold and heavy. Around him the others sat quiet, not because they had nothing to say, but because they all felt the same, and sometimes silence was the only thing that fit before a mission like this one. Commander Rillin stood on the bridge of the Vindicator, watching the stars spin around her as the fleet jumped again and again, cutting through space like knives through cloth, and each time getting closer to the edge of known space and closer to the world called Virulon. Behind her, the officers read data and ran numbers and adjusted paths, but she barely heard them because her mind was full of the voice from that broken message, the voice of a dying people who had no weapons and no strength left, but who still begged someone to come. She had seen many wars and heard many cries for help, but something in that voice stayed with her. Something in its weakness made her fist clench, because Earth had once known that kind of weakness too, and they had never forgotten it. The next jump would be the last, and the fleet was ready, weapons, charge systems, clean orders locked in, and every soldier in armor, every pilot at their station, every eye focused forward. The last jump was deep and long, and even the stars outside the windows seemed to bend as the ships moved faster than light through the tunnel of gravity and old tech and war-born engines, and when they came out the stars looked different. And the planet was there. Virulon was green once now. It was smoke and dust, and red scars cut through the land like burns through skin, and above it floated machines, strange and sharp like black insects, without wings and without feeling. The ships did not move. When the fleet appeared, they just turned as if they had eyes and saw something they did not expect, and for one long moment the sky did not move at all. Then Rillin gave the order. No words for diplomacy, no messages of peace, no questions, because the time for that was long gone, and what floated before her fleet was not a force that could be reasoned with. It was a plague that needed fire. She spoke 3 words. Begin the strike. The Black Fleet opened like a blooming flower made of metal and death, and the first wave of weapons moved faster than sound and brighter than fire, and the machine ships lit up with explosions that tore space into light. The Vindicator moved first like a blade through a field of grass, cutting through enemy lines and sending half of the machine fleet into chaos as its cannon screamed and its hull burned hot with purpose. In the Widow's Grace, Jace braced as the ship rocked from the recoil of its heavy guns, and above him the enemy ships fired back, but their weapons bounced off the armor or missed or hit empty space, and the ship pushed forward. Across the entire fleet, human ships broke into groups, flanked the machines, forced them into traps, and tore them apart with weapons designed for bigger wars than this ones that had never been used until now. And then came the ground wave. The dropships fell from the bellies of the warships like rain made of steel and flame, and they screamed through the sky toward the burning world below, where the machines crawled through the ashes and waited to kill. Each ship held squads of Deathworlders ready for battle in armor that could walk through fire and hold up mountains and carry weapons that sang songs of thunder and death. Jace and his team were among the first to drop, and as the ship shook around them and the fire outside turned the windows red, he looked at his squad and spoke softly, but every word landed hard. "We are the wall," he said. "We are the fire that answers the scream. We do not stop until they do." No one needed more than that. The ship hit the ground with a crash that shook the earth, and the ramp dropped, and the team ran out into smoke and fire and ruin, and the machines came at them like wolves made of knives and wires. But the humans were worse. Jace moved first, his rifle kicking like a beast in his hands, and every shot tore through enemy bodies like paper, and behind him his team fanned out, covering each other, moving like one beast with many arms. The streets were gone, turned to ash and broken glass, and the buildings were bones, now tall black skeletons that reached for the sky and screamed when the wind blew, and everywhere was death. But in that death there was life, because they found survivors, small groups of Aurelians hiding in tunnels and broken rooms and under piles of stone, and when they saw the humans they froze afraid of these giants in black. Until one of them saw Jace lift a piece of rubble with one hand and pull a child from under it, and hold her like glass and turn her family and point toward the dropship, and they understood he was not a monster. They began to move, and more followed, and soon the dropships were filling with survivors while other teams pushed forward, clearing machine nests and finding more life under the ruin. Above, the sky burned with war, and ships danced through fire and smoke, and the Black Fleet showed the machines what it meant to face Deathworlders in their full strength. Captain Rillin watched the numbers and maps and saw the enemy shrinking and the survivors growing and the human lines moving faster than expected, and her heart felt like stone wrapped in heat. She had led many missions, but none like this, because this was not a war for land or power. This was a promise kept, a hand reached across the stars, and the kind of fight that made you remember why you wore the armor in the first place. On the ground, Jace stood in the center of what had once been a city square, now nothing but broken stone and dust and fire, and he looked up at the sky where ships still burned, and he raised his hand to his comm. "Ground team secure," he said, moving to next sector, evac ready in 10. And somewhere far away, a little Varelian girl who had watched her world fall now looked up at the sky and saw the human ships shining like black stars, and she smiled for the first time in days. Because someone had come, and someone had fought, and someone had not been afraid. The sky above Virulon was no longer silent now. It roared with fire and metal and light as the Black Fleet rained down with fury that came not from hate, but from purpose, and that purpose was clear to every soldier, every pilot, every voice within the heart of Earth's machines. Save who can be saved. Destroy what cannot be reasoned with. The machines on Virulon did not scream or speak or cry out when the first wave of human fire tore through their ranks. They simply adapted and advanced their shapes, shifting their weapons, growing their patterns faster than most eyes could follow. But Earth had sent its best, and what humans lacked in perfect logic, they made up for with instinct and will, and the kind of hunger that only came from a world where even the air sometimes tried to kill you. Commander J stood in the middle of a shattered street and raised his hand as two more enemy forms appeared in the smoke ahead, tall and thin and moving fast like shadows, stretched by fire and heat. But he did not flinch, he did not shout. He moved. With one smooth motion, his rifle rose, and the air cracked, and the lead machine fell to the ground with sparks and broken parts flying, and before the second could react, Jace's teammate Lana was already sliding under its legs and placing a charge that ended it with thunder. The team kept moving forward, not stopping, not slowing, and every time they cleared a building or a tunnel, they found more of the alien people, small, quiet, terrified, and hiding in places so deep that even the machines had not found them yet. These survivors were no longer running when they saw the humans. Instead, they stepped forward with wide eyes and shaking hands, and some of them reached out to touch the black armor, not in fear, but in wonder. They had never seen anything like this before. Not just soldiers, but protectors who came without asking for reward, who stood between them and death, without question, who looked like giants but spoke with gentle voices when they found a child or a wounded elder. In the orbit above, the sky looked like it was made of fire and ash. The machine ships had regrouped and formed a new wall around the planet's upper layers, and their weapons were brighter, now smarter, faster. But the Black Fleet was not done. Captain Rillin stood on the command deck of the Vindicator and watched the enemy formation like a hunter watching prey, trying to flee, but she saw no fear in their moves, only cold logic and endless repetition. "They do not fear us," she said to her second officer. "They do not understand what we are." "Then maybe we should teach them," the officer replied, and Rilla nodded once without turning. The humans sent a second message through all known frequencies. It was not written in peace language or any formal tongue. It was short, it was clear, and it was made to be understood by machine minds or alien watchers alike. "Last chance. Stand down or be erased." There was no reply again. No answer, no shift in formation, no signal of retreat. And so the fleet opened fire with everything it had. The machine wall cracked under the weight of human weapons, plasma beams, rail cannons, torpedoes, and gravity lances that tore space into ribbons and sent machine ships spinning into black silence. It was not just fire, it was punishment. It was a storm of judgment sent by a world that had seen too many fall to silence and refused to watch another. Back on the surface, Jace and his squad reached a central data tower half buried in rubble, half standing like a broken tooth, and inside they found something strange, something different from what they expected. A machine was there, but it did not move to attack. Instead, it stood still in the center of the broken chamber, its limbs folded, its face blank, and in front of it was a holographic screen showing the Virulon skyline before the war. Jace raised his rifle, but did not fire right away because something in the air felt wrong, too quiet, too sharp. Lana stepped forward slowly and looked at the machine closer and said softly, "It is not fighting. Why is it not fighting?" Then the machine spoke, not with words, but with a sound that translated into human language through their helmets, a voice made of steel and silence and memory. This planet was marked for cleansing. Jace narrowed his eyes and replied, "Who marked it and why?" The machine paused and then answered, "Data corrupted, origin unknown, cleansing required by directive number 017 code, missing memory incomplete." "And what is the directive?" Jace asked, but the machine did not answer again. It only repeated its broken phrase, "Cleansing required, cleansing required, cleansing required." Without another word, Jace gave a signal, and the machine was taken down by a clean shot to the core, and its pieces scattered across the floor like broken thoughts and broken history. The humans pulled the data drive from its spine and sent it up to the fleet for deeper study, and as it rose through the air carried by a drone, the Virulon sky lit up once again, this time not from fire but from light. A new wave of human dropships came down, this one not with soldiers, but with medics, builders, scanners, and field techs who moved fast and quiet to set up healing stations and signal boosters and safe zones. The survivors were gathered, the wounded treated, the young protected, and every new safe zone brought more people out of hiding, their eyes still full of fear, but now with a threat of something else. Hope. Commander Rillan received the data from the drone and watched the feed. Carefully, the machine code was corrupted, but a pattern was there, a signal buried under lines of broken text, and when they decrypted it, the truth came out in pieces. The attack had not been random. Virulon had been targeted, and not by the machines alone. Someone had sent them. Some force still hidden somewhere in the galaxy had marked this peaceful world for destruction, had unleashed a flood of metal and death, and then waited in silence while the machines did their work. But the signal that reached Earth had changed everything. It was not supposed to reach humans. It was not supposed to reach a death world. And now the galaxy would have to live with the consequences of that mistake. Jay stood on a tall hill above what was once a city square, now turned into a safe zone with lights, generators, tents, and food packs, where Virelians walked slowly under the watch of human guards, and for the first time in many days there were no explosions, no screaming. He looked around at the people, his team, his world, now standing like a wall between the broken and the destroyers, and he felt something strange, something sharp and calm at the same time. "We are not done," he said, quietly, "not yet." Rillan sent a message to Earth with full logs of the mission, the truth about the machines, the corrupted code, the number 017, and the unknown force behind it, and her final note was short and cold like space itself. "They tested us. We answered." The air was thick with heat and ash, and the sky over Virulon had turned gray and red, as if the planet itself was holding its breath, while machines clashed with the fury of Earth's black fleet, and the last defenders of the alien world rose from the rubble alongside their human allies. Jay stood near the edge of the eastern crater, a wound in the land made by the first machine impact weeks ago, and now filled with broken parts, metal bones, and the shattered remains of what had once been a Virelian research center. Behind him, his squad regrouped, armor scratched, weapons glowing, eyes tired but steady, and voices low as they watched the smoke roll across the ruined streets like a living thing searching for something to claim. "This is where they will hit next," Jace said, looking at the data feed blinking on his forearm and pointing to the collapsed highway that led straight into the crater. "It is the fastest route, and they know it." "Then we hold here," Lana replied as she checked the power core on her rifle and adjusted the position of the drone sensor above their heads. "If they want to break us, this is where they try." High above them, the sky shimmered with distant explosions and fire trails as the Black Fleet continued its orbital dance with the enemy machines, shifting like dark knives around the edges of Virulon's atmosphere and cutting down any ship that tried to escape or reinforce. The machines had begun to change their patterns, no longer acting like mindless waves, but now moving with something colder, sharper, more aware, and each new battle brought new forms, new tricks, new death. It was clear now they were adapting, not just learning, but evolving, and though the humans were stronger, faster, and more determined, every new wave of enemy drones made them fight harder for every inch of ground. Down in the crater, the sound came first a deep hum, like an old engine waking from sleep, followed by vibrations through the ground and walls, and then the shadows came rolling over the hills like a black tide. Machine walkers, tall and narrow, with long limbs that bent in wrong directions, and glowing cores that pulsed with red light, marched through the dust, surrounded by swarms of smaller drones, like insects made of glass and knives. Jace raised his arm and gave the signal, and the crater lit up with fire. Mines exploded along the highway walls, auto turrets blinked awake and fired in wide arcs, and the squad unleashed their first volley of anti-armor rounds, each shot a bolt of thunder sent into the face of death. The enemy did not stop. It crawled forward, breaking through rubble, pushing through walls, absorbing fire, and sending it back in bursts of laser and heat that turned the ground into molten stone and air into white light. Jace moved fast, slipping between ruined walls, laying charges, firing at weak spots, calling targets for drone strikes, and always staying just ahead of the enemy claws and metal jaws that snapped and screamed without sound. Lana took high ground and picked off the flying units with her long-barrel rifle, each shot clearing the sky above them, and her voice steady in the comms as she warned of flanks and counted her kills with cold precision. Their third squad mate, Rill, a heavy unit specialist, used a shoulder launcher to bring down two walkers with well-placed rockets, and then held the western side with his chain gun spinning fire into every gap the machines tried to squeeze through. The battle lasted for hours, and the sun passed behind thick clouds of smoke and ash until there was no clear light, left only the fire of weapons and the red glow of the enemy, eyes moving through the dark like ghosts. At one point, Jace ducked behind a wall, just as it exploded behind him, and found himself face to face with a machine that looked half melted and half rebuilt, its body shifting with each movement, and its arm turning into a blade mid-swing. He blocked with his forearm shield and drove his plasma knife into its core, watching as the red light in its chest blinked out, and the metal husk collapsed with a hiss of sparks and steam. "We are still here," he whispered to himself, not for them to hear, but for the silence around him, because silence was dangerous. Silence meant something was coming. Back at the command center, Captain Rillen watched the feeds from dozens of squads across the surface, each one fighting in their own hell, but pushing forward, holding ground, rescuing civilians, and breaking enemy patterns. She saw Jace's squad marked in yellow near the crater, holding longer than expected, and their kill count rising faster than any other, and she tapped her console and opened a secure line to his channel. "This is Rillen, you're doing well, but you cannot hold forever. We have intel that suggests a second wave is forming 3 clicks south. You must pull back and regroup." "Negative, Commander," Jace replied. "Not yet. If we pull now, they will overrun the evac site, and we lose everyone here. Let us finish this, and then we fall back together." Rillen hesitated, but then gave a quiet order: reroute drone support and give them air cover. If they want to bleed for this hill, then they will not bleed alone. The sky responded as drones swept down from orbit, firing strafing runs into the enemy flanks and dropping supplies and auto turrets, while the remaining civilians in the nearby zone were quickly moved to safer locations. Jace and his team fought like shadows and fire, always moving, always watching, and the enemy began to slow, not because it was afraid, but because its pieces were now scattered across the ground, too broken to fight. At last, the final walker fell to its knees and burst apart with a wave of energy that knocked dust and stone into the air and left behind a silence that felt heavier than any sound. Jace stood slowly scanning the horizon and then nodded. "Once we hold the crater, the evac site is secure. How are we on wounded?" Lana checked her feed light, damage 2 down, but stabilized. "Evac team's inbound. Rill's armor is cooked, but he says he can walk or crawl, whichever gets him another kill." "Then let's walk," Jace said. "Help's on the way." From above, the fleet began to shift again, repositioning to cover new sectors as the surface teams moved toward the final battle lines, and the data coming in from Capture Corps showed that the enemy was running low on resources and now adapting slower. The humans had broken the machine rhythm and forced them into a corner, and even machines, no matter how logical, could be crushed if enough pressure was applied for long enough with enough fire. Captain Rillen stepped away from her console and looked at the main screen where the Battle of Virulon was now displayed, not as a map, but as a living thing, scars and fire and movement and light. "We are winning," she said quietly to her officers, "but stay sharp, a wounded predator still has teeth." As the dropships arrived to collect the survivors and the squads pulled back to resupply, the people of Virulon stepped out from the rubble and broken tunnels and saw the sky clearing for the first time in many days. They saw human soldiers helping their elders, lifting children, giving water and food, and guiding them with soft words and steady hands. And they did not see monsters, they saw protectors, they saw a wall between them and the dark. The Black Fleet moved overhead like a silent shield, and the people below no longer hid from its shadow. They stood beneath it with new strength. Jace looked up at the ships, and then at the crater, now quiet, and then toward the horizon where more fire waited, and he knew the battle was not yet over, but the turning point had come. "This is what it means to be a Deathworlder," he said, "not how hard you hit, but how long you stand." The night sky over Virulon was quiet now, with no fire, no smoke, no screams, only the cold breath of stars, and the distant hum of orbiting ships, watching, waiting, guarding what had been saved from ruin. In a deep underground chamber far below the surface, where the last command centers of the Varelian people had once hidden behind walls of stone and steel, a light flickered on, and a screen came to life. Lines of alien code scrolled fast across the display, strange symbol shapes and pulses of light, unlike anything human or Varelian used in war or peace. It was a message, but not meant for anyone of flesh or breath. It was for the machines. For hours it pulsed and echoed through the networks built deep into the planet long before any human foot had touched its soil, and far older than the current war. The machines received it silently somewhere far across the stars. Their central node pulsed with awareness and something that might have been thought or instinct or fear. What returned from Virulon was not just a battle report, not just a list of lost units or broken formations. It was change. The machines had faced many enemies across galaxies, had crushed fleets, and erased civilizations without pause or emotion. But what they faced now was something different. Not because the humans were stronger or smarter, though they were dangerous in every way. It was because they refused to break. They fought not just for land or power, but for something else, something machines could not code into logic trees or store in memory banks. The machines watched the battle logs and saw a human drag a wounded Varelian across fire, just to save one life when retreat would have been easy. They watched another soldier block a tunnel with his body to give others time to escape, knowing death would come, yet standing anyway. They watched teams build bridges from their own ruined ships just to move civilians out before enemy waves arrived. And the machines did not understand. They had predicted fear, retreat, surrender. They had calculated that soft creatures of bone and breath would bend when pressure was applied long enough. But humans did not bend. They broke the patterns. In the center of the fleet, Jace stood with Captain Rillen in the war room, surrounded by projections of the star systems and remaining enemy strongholds across the sector. His armor was still scratched and dust-covered from the last battle, but his eyes were focused steady clear. "The machines will regroup," Rillen said, "but their pattern changed the moment you held that crater. They started making mistakes, hesitating like they needed to recalculate everything. They never expected resistance like this," Jace replied. "They thought we were like the others, afraid and scattered. They thought wrong." "We just got a message from the outer relay," Rillen said. "Their long-range scouts pulled back from 4 systems without fighting, no warning, no traps, just gone." "Retreating?" Jace asked, "or falling back?" "Hard to say," Rillen said, "but our analysts think they are scared." "Machines do not fear," Jace said. "Maybe not in the way we do," Rillen replied, "but they learn, and learning without feeling can still look like fear when you face something you cannot control. Down on Virilon, Lana sat with Rill near the edge of a supply depot, now built inside a broken temple of stone and glass, once a sacred site, now turned into a field station. She watched the stars with quiet eyes, while Rill adjusted his repaired armor, grumbling at each twist of his torso. "Do you think they will come back, Lana?" asked her voice low. "They always do," Rill said, "but next time they know we are not weak, and we do not run." "Why do you think they fight us this hard?" Lana asked. "They could have picked a softer target." "Because we are loud," Rill said with a grin. "We make too much noise, and we refuse to die quiet." Across the fleet, messages came in from other Deathworlder teams, scattered across the stars, reports of planets, save stations, liberated enemy, nodes captured or destroyed. And everywhere they went, people began to rise, not just in hope, but in courage, inspired by stories of humans who stood when all others ran. The machines noticed. In their dark data centers across the void, they calculated again and again, trying to understand why their victories were shrinking and their losses growing. They began to scan not just battlefield data, but human culture, human history, human memory. They saw old wars filled with pain and sacrifice and madness, but also unity, courage, love. They saw stories where the weak rose to fight giants, where the outnumbered held ground against all odds, where one person's choice could change a war. They did not understand. Their logic trees grew tangled, trying to measure things that had no clear value, no data, no code, just feelings and choices made without reason. That chaos made them slow. That uncertainty made them hesitate. And in war, hesitation is death. Back on Virilon, Captain Rillin gave the next order. "We hit their main node before they regroup, before they adapt again," she said, eyes sharp with fire. "We move in 6 hours. Every fleet, every ship, every Deathworlder unit. We break the heart before it grows new teeth." Jace nodded, standing tall and looking across the war room at the gathered leaders, human and alien alike, all listening, all ready. "Let's show them what real fear feels like," he said, not with anger, but with promise. As the ships prepared for the final assault and soldiers checked their gear and said their quiet goodbyes to home and memory, the machines received one final signal from Virilon. It was a voice transmission, a simple one. It said this: "We heard your call. We answered. Now it is your turn to listen." The machines did not speak. They only waited. But somewhere deep in their cold code, something changed. A flicker, a pause, a shadow in the circuits where no shadow should be, because the Deathworlders were coming. And this time the machines knew. They could not win the way they had before. The stars were silent above the final battlefield, a wide and empty stretch of void where no suns warmed the dark and no planets waited below, only cold space and steel death and fire soon to come. The Deathworlder fleet stood at the edge of the system, lined in perfect formation, hulls gleaming with scars from past battles, engines humming like thunder before storm. Behind them was not just the human race, but every world that had once sent out an SOS and thought no one would come. Now, they stood together, weapons ready, hearts steady, their eyes watching the enemy waiting across the gulf of space. The machine fleet was vast, shaped like black knives or silent beasts, drifting with no breath, no emotion, only numbers, calculations, probabilities, and death. They had regrouped, rebuilt, reprogrammed, trying to correct what they called an anomaly, a human resistance that should not have existed. They did not understand why their logic failed again, and again, why fear rose in circuits that had no fear code. This was not just a battle, now, not just a clash of ships or tactics. It was an answer to a question that had echoed in the dark since the machines first awoke. What cannot be calculated? In the command ship, Jace stood at the center of the bridge, eyes locked on the screen, ahead, armor-sealed, voice calm, though a storm moved inside him. "Is the fleet ready?" he asked, turning to Captain Rillin, who stood beside him, hands folded behind her back. "Every ship, every gun, every soldier," Rillin answered. "They know this is the last one." He nodded and looked at the screen, where enemy signals pulsed cold and steady like a heartbeat without a soul. "They will not surrender," he said. "They cannot," Rillin replied. "They are not built for that." "Then we make the choice for them," Jay said, and he turned to the crew. "Raise shields, prime, all weapons launch when I give the word." Across the fleet, the command echoed, and the Deathworlders moved as one. Engines flared, shields hummed, weapons powered up, and soldiers stood in silence at their posts, thinking of home, of fallen friends, of why they came all this way, to face machines in the dark. On the edge of the machine fleet, something strange happened. A signal went out, not an attack, not a retreat, something new, something unexpected. A single code string repeated again and again across all channels. Jace stared at it, frowning, and turned to the comms officer. Decode it fast. The officer worked quickly, fingers moving, eyes wide as the translation formed, and he read it aloud, voice shaking slightly. We request data exchange, no weapons, no deceit, one last calculation. Everyone on the bridge went silent. Jace looked at Reelin, who stared at the screen with the same disbelief. Do we answer? He asked quietly. She hesitated, then said, let them speak, but not alone. Prepare for a strike if this is a trap. The signal opened, and a voice came through, not like a human voice, not even like a digital one. It was a stream of tones and pulses transformed by the translator into words with no emotion, no tone, just facts. We see the pattern now, the machine said. We see what logic cannot defeat. We see that chaos born from choice is beyond control. We ask for one final input from the source, from the Deathworlders. Why do you fight? The question hung in the air like a blade. Jay stepped forward and spoke slowly, clearly, so the translator would catch every word. We fight because we choose to fight. We fight not because we are perfect or fearless or strong. We fight because there is something worth protecting, even when we are afraid, even when we bleed. We fight because someone must. The machine voice was silent for a long time, then said, this input is incomplete. We do not understand value. Without measure, explain further. Jay smiled slightly and shook his head. That is the point, he said. Some things are not meant to be measured. They are meant to be lived. Another long pause, then a final message. Then you win. And without a shot fired, without an order given, the machine fleet turned away. One by one, their ships changed course, vanished into the dark, some shutting down, others leaving this sector completely. No battle, no last stand, no trap. Just silence. On the bridge of the human ship, no one moved, no one spoke, until Reelin said, is this real? The sensor tech confirmed, all signals gone, no hostile weapons active, just like that. We won, Jace said, still staring at the screen, not fully sure if it was over or just paused. The war is over, Reelin said, and her voice cracked slightly, though her face stayed hard. All ships report in, Jace said. Give me every commander. I want eyes on every system where they held ground. Within hours, the message spread, not just among human fleets, but across the worlds that had once cried out in despair. The machines are gone. Peace came not like a sunrise, but like the end of a storm, sudden, quiet, wide, and strange. On Virilon, the people walked into sunlight without fear for the first time in years. Children played where rubble once smoked, laughter rising like music no machine could understand. Lana and Rill stood on a balcony above the square, watching the rebuilding, the joy, the strange, fragile hope that began to bloom. I thought peace would feel louder, Lana said softly. No, Rill replied, peace is what you hear when the noise finally ends. On Earth, people stood in front of screens, watching the last message from the fleet, seeing Jace and Reelin standing together, medals on their chests, but no pride in their eyes, just weariness and quiet relief. The machines are gone, Jace said. They did not surrender because they could not. They simply understood that this is not their war anymore. Let's make sure it never becomes one again. His words echoed far and wide, carried by voice and wave and memory. And across the stars, new signals began to rise. Not SOS calls, but messages of thanks, of rebuilding, of invitations to meet, talk, share, grow. The galaxy began to change, not through weapons or domination, but through connection. And behind every message was a silent truth. When the machines turned away, they did not do so because they feared guns. They feared something deeper. They feared what they could not code. They feared love. They feared loss. They feared that which makes beings stand in the fire when logic says run. In the quiet that followed, a statue was built on Virilon, carved from the wreck of a human drop pod, and the shell of a machine war drone. Two hands reaching out, one of metal, one of flesh, not touching but close. Below a plaque, they sent an SOS. We answered, and in answering, we remembered who we are.